Hey everyone, it's William Moore, and you're watching Beyond the Ties That Bind. Thanks for joining me, and I pray that everyone's having as good of a day as you could possibly have, living in the present circumstances we now find ourselves subject to. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the Constitution, the United States Constitution. Now, when I talk about this topic, a lot of people go into cognitive dissonance mode because I am not going to be talking positively about the United States Constitution. And a lot of people don't want to hear anything derogatory about the document they've been brainwashed to believe is holy or inspired. Because we have been trained from a young age to believe that this document protects freedom, that this document is something to be revered. Now, the United States Constitution, we're told, is to restrain government and protect individual freedom, when it's actually the opposite. It is to restrain individual freedom and protect government. Now, as I stated, a lot of people go into cognitive dissonance mode. They do not want to let go of traditions and cultural bias that they have been brainwashed to accept. Just like people today are being brainwashed to accept social distancing. We've all been brainwashed to accept that the Constitution is the law of the land and it is in favor of the individual and protects the individual. No, it protects government. It protects government. Now, on the screen, I have Truth is Treason in the Empire of Lies. And the Empire of Lies we are living in is built upon the United States Constitution. So let's take some time to think critically. Let's take some time to come away from the cult of personality, the personality of the United States Constitution. And let's look for and search for the truth about this document. Now, I am going to be quoting from, and I'm using books which I received my information from, such as Tyranny Unmasked by John Taylor, Frederick Bastiat, The Law, Conceived in Liberty by Murray Rothbard, and that's a 4-volume set there. The 5th volume, The New Republic, 1784 to 1791 by Murray and Rothbard. No Treason by Lysander Spooner. The Anti-Federalist Papers. Conspiracy in Philadelphia, The Broken Covenant of the U.S. Constitution by Gary North. So these are the books that I studied to get my information from, and these are books which will tell you a history that is different than the history you're going to receive in mainstream circles. Now, we know that history is nothing more than an agreed upon set of lies. Agreed upon by the victors. The victors are the ones who write history. So, if you will, just allow me this time. Hang in there. Stay with me to the end, because you may notice something you've never noticed before. You may see something that you've never seen before. You may discover something that you've overlooked. So, a little history about the United States Constitution. In 1787, 55 men got together, one left. Out of those 54 men left, 39 signed the document known as the United States Constitution. That was a group composed of bankers and lawyers. Now, if bankers and lawyers got together today and they decided to create a document which was going to be a governing document for a country, people would be highly suspicious, and rightfully so. Now, back then, people were not privy to what was going on in Philadelphia. There was a cloak of secrecy around the proceedings. The proceedings were very secret. Anyone studying the Constitution should know that, and that should be a red flag to anyone who studies the Constitution. So, you had lawyers and bankers which drafted a document that birthed a strong central government which had the power of unlimited taxation. I'm going to say that again. The United States Constitution in 1787 was drafted in Philadelphia by a group of men who wanted to create a strong central government so that they would have the power of unlimited taxation. They would have the power to raise up a militia to suppress any type of insurrection, any type of rebellion against their authority. Now, from 1776 to 1787, the country operated under the Articles of Confederation, a very loose set of documents which left the power of governing in the hands of the states. So the states could govern as they saw fit. All power was left in the hands of the states. So each territory could decide how they wanted to live, and they could decide their own laws. Now, what they were going to do in Philadelphia was to consolidate the power and bring the power under one central authority. And through the years, we've been taught these myths about the founding fathers. And, that's one of the things that has to take place before you can, create a nation, is you have to create a lie around the birth of a nation. The first function of the founders of nations, after the founding itself, is to devise a set of true falsehoods about origin, a mythology that will make it desirable for all nationals to continue to live under common authority, and, indeed, make it impossible for them to entertain contrary thoughts. So, it's going to make it impossible for them to entertain contrary thoughts, like maybe a thought of rebellion. So, the opening of the Constitution, we have the phrase, "we the people," and it goes on to talk about forming a more perfect union, tranquility, common defense, general warfare. Now, if we start to look at these terms under the looking glass of legal definitions, we'll see that the Constitution has nothing to do with individual freedom whatsoever. It was protecting a corporation. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to read a quote from Lysander Spooner. Now, this quote comes from the 1860s, about 80 years after the Constitution was established. So, it is a time-stamped document. However, it has a perpetual truth contained within it. And yet we have what purports or professes or is claimed to be a contract, the Constitution, made 80 years ago by men who are now all dead, and who never had any power to bind us, but which, it is claimed, has nevertheless bound 3 generations of men, consisting of many millions, and which, it is claimed, will be binding upon all the millions that are to come, but which nobody ever signed, sealed, delivered, witnessed, or acknowledged, and which few persons, compared with the whole number that are claimed to be bound by it, have ever read, or even seen, or ever will read or see. Lysander Spooner, No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority. This is very true. A lot of people, they've never seen the Constitution, and many more have never read it. And when you find somebody who says that they have read it, they're talking about the Bill of Rights, which is a rider to the Constitution, which came about 2 years later after the Constitution was drafted in Philadelphia in 1787. So the Bill of Rights is really not the Constitution. And when people say they are reading the Constitution, they're talking about the Bill of Rights. The Constitution is composed of articles, sections, and clauses. And those articles, they're legally binding phrases and paragraphs. So anyway, if we go to the opening of the Constitution, and remember, this was drafted by bankers and lawyers. Think about that. That should be another red flag. Besides the fact that it was drafted in secrecy, behind closed doors. Now, if we go to the preamble, it says, "We the people." We the people. Now, everybody usually thinks that means that everybody in the nation Everybody in the country, every individual, but it doesn't. It means the body politic. That's who we the people is talking about, the body politic. It's not talking about we the people as in each individual. And the definition of body politic, a group of persons politically organized governmental authority. What? A group of persons politically organized under a single governmental or controlling authority, as Brian over at High Impact Vlog says. Then if we go to the legal definition, body politic, it is talking about government or corporations. When applied to the government, this phrase signifies the state. As to the persons who compose the body politic, they take collectively the name of people or nation, and individually they are citizens, when considered in relation to their political rights and subjects as being submitted to the laws of the state. So, going back to the Constitution, we the people of the United States. Well, who's that talking about? It's talking about the body politic. It's talking about the people who control. It's talking about that government which was birthed by the drafting of the Constitution. That's why they had the Constitution drafted, so that this government would have teeth, that it would have power, that it would have authority. Authority over who? Authority over you and me. That's what they planned. But they don't have authority over free men. They have no authority over a free man. So, if we look at the ones, they're the ones that are forming the union. It says, in order to form a more perfect union. Well, who's forming the more perfect union? The ones who drafted the Constitution. So, they're establishing justice. Now, how do they establish justice? Through their court system. The court system that they created in the Constitution. To ensure domestic tranquility. To ensure peace. How are they going to ensure peace? Because you've given them the power in the Constitution to raise up a militia to suppress any insurrection, any rebellion. Provide for the common defense against enemies, both foreign and domestic. And when they say domestic enemies, they're talking about enemies of the government. Promote the general welfare. Now, if we go back to provide for common defense and we go down to Article 1, we're in Article 1, Section 8, and we go to clauses 11 through 16. I'm not going to read the entire clause, but to declare war, to raise and support armies, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union. Here we go, suppress insurrections and repel invasions. To provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States. So, they are the ones, the government, they're the ones who are forming this union to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense. We, the people, is talking about the body politic, the government. It's not talking about the individuals. Because there were only 39 people present at the time. Only 39 people present at the time, not the entire nation. If this was for the entire country, all of the country would have been included in the proceedings, but they were not. Only 39 men, and that was behind closed doors. So, now, to promote the general welfare. Well, what does promote general welfare mean? What does general welfare mean? Well, if we go to general welfare, it's the concern of the government for the health, Obamacare, peace, morality, Roe versus Wade, and safety of its citizens. Providing for the welfare of the general public is a basic goal of the government. The preamble to the United States Constitution cites promotion of the general welfare as a primary reason for the creation of the Constitution. So now, if we're talking about promoting the general welfare, we go to Section 8 and Clause 1 of the Constitution to see what that's all about. Now, Section 8, Clause 1. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes. Right there, robbery. How is this a freedom document? How can anyone refer to the Constitution when they're talking about freedom, or securing freedoms, or protecting freedoms? How in the world can anybody who's talking about freedom make reference to this piece of caca document? Okay, so have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts. They haven't done that yet. All they do is rack it up. And provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. So, what's general welfare all about? It's about raising money, generating revenue. Taxation, robbery, because taxation is theft. So, how do you provide for the general welfare? Well, you provide for the general welfare according to the Constitution by making laws. Because if you go to Section 7 of the Constitution, Clause number 2, or the second clause, every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it. But if not, he shall return it, with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to reconsider it. If after such reconsideration 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent, together with the objections, to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered, and if approved by 2/3 of that House, it shall become law. But in all such cases, the votes of both houses shall be determined by yeas and nays, and the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered in the journal of each house respectively. Okay, so right here it says, it shall become law. That's how you provide for the general welfare, by making laws. That's what Article 1, Section 7 says. And then if you go to Article 12, Section 2, Article 2, Section 2. It says, the President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. Then in Clause 2, it says, he shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur. So he has the power, along with the advice of the Senate, to make treaties, or the consent of the Senate to make treaties. Now, it only takes 2/3 of the senators who are present at the time to concur to this. So what if you have 30 senators? Well, then only 20 have to concur, only 20 have to agree, and then you have a law of the land. Because if you go to Article 6, the second clause, in the Constitution, it says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Okay, so the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which are going to be determined by the House and the Senate, and this is why Patrick Henry was so opposed to the Constitution. When he was invited to Philadelphia in 1787, he said, I smell a rat. And he was prophetically, it was prophetic that he said that, because it was true. It was a rat. Because he went on later to say in the Virginia ratifying convention that the Senate along with the president, had the power to render themselves absolute and to make any laws that they deemed fit to make. This man knew more about the Constitution than anybody alive today. And he saw the danger in it. But yet today we have people who praise this. We have people who worship this document blindly. And this document is a result of a coup d'etat. They overthrew the existing government and created a new government. We're going to see that in a little while. So you have, Article 1, Section 1. You go back to that, and it states that all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. So, all legislative power. If you go to the definition of legislative power, the authority under the Constitution to make laws and to alter or repeal them. So they have the power to make a law, or to alter a law, or to repeal a law, even a law that's in the Constitution, such as amendments. We're going to get into the definition of amendment here in a little bit, and you'll see that amendment does not matter whatsoever. So you have the power to make treaties. So they have all legislative power. They can make a treaty, and a treaty becomes, as we read in the Constitution, supreme law of the land. Any law that they make, they have the legislative power to make law. Any law that they make in the United States becomes the supreme law of the land, just by a majority of a minority. We're talking 535 people in a nation of 328 million. We have a minority of people, but all it takes is a majority of that minority to make a law, to legislate. How crazy is that? This is not a freedom document. There is no way that this document guarantees freedom. There is no way that this document protects freedom. This document is the opposite of freedom. And don't try and use this document against them, because you'll find yourself in a court of law with a justice or a judge who can determine whether or not the Constitution is even cited within the case. So, who interprets the Constitution? Who decides what laws shall be affirmed or discarded under the Constitution? Well, that would be the judicial branch, the justices, the courts. And the Constitution is only as fair or only as strong as the body which oversees and interprets it. And in this case, it's only as fair. And it's the judicial branch that oversees the power of the Constitution. And the Constitution is only as powerful as the body which oversees it. So the judicial branch, through judicial review, they decide what's affirmed, what's discarded. Of course, they're appointed by the executive branch, and sometimes they're confirmed by the Senate. So, it's not really checks and balances when you get down to judicial review. You have a majority in the court, 5 people out of 9, who can determine through opinion. Now, it's opinion, it's their personal opinion. They can determine what law stays, what law goes. That's your Constitution. Now, how is it that people think a document or a nation which the course of that nation can be determined by 5 people can have anything to do with freedom? So, the document can be scrapped just as easily as the Articles of Confederation were. And if we go to Article 5 in the Constitution, we'll see that it would be really easy for them to scrap the entire Constitution. Article 5. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution are on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. So, all they have to do in Congress is propose an amendment. There was no constitutional convention which gave us amendments concerning prohibition or the income tax. These were all decided in Congress. Now, amendments can be changed. We're going to see that in a little bit. But that's the power that Congress has. They determine the law. It's not we the people as in each individual. It's we the people as in the body politic. And in this case, the body politic, today is the bankers. They control everything. The bankers are carrying out the crisis that we see going on in front of us right now. Your Constitution is powerless to prevent it. How is it protecting individual freedoms right now? It's not protecting individual freedoms. It's never protected individual freedoms. That's why I love the quote by Lysander Spooner, where he states, but whether the Constitution really be one thing or another, this much is certain, that it has either authorized such a government as we have had, or has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist. Now, I tend to lean towards that it has either authorized such a government as we have had. I believe that the Constitution authorizes a despotic, tyrannical government. That's why they wanted a strong central government. Because the first thing that they did was enact taxes. And even during the time before the enactment or the ratification, whatever you want to say, of the Constitution, it was a tyrannical government, because the men who fought in the War of Independence, War for Independence from Great Britain, those men who fought to help those 39 men who would one day become the ruling class of psychopaths over the country, the men who fought that war for independence, they were paid by the Continental Congress with worthless script. So then what happens? The Congress, they propose a tax. Then what happens? Well, the men take this script that they were paid by the government with for fighting the war, laying their lives on the line. They take this script and they try and pay the taxes, and guess what? The government says, nah, it's got to be paid in silver and gold. Silver and gold. You can't pay it with the worthless script that we gave you for fighting for our independence from Great Britain. You can't use that. It's worthless to us. You got to give us silver and gold. So when they couldn't pay, guess what the Congress did? They went around and they started confiscating lands. That led to all types of rebellion. One rebellion in particular, Shays' Rebellion up in Massachusetts. So you had all of these rebellions going on. So that prompted these men to get together to draft the Constitution, so they could have the power to suppress insurrection, so they would have the power to legally tax now, because the Articles of Confederation didn't give them the power to tax. Only the states had power to tax. Then they had to rely upon the states to pay the central government, which the states weren't doing. And then George Washington, that tyrant, he comes into office and he proposes a whiskey tax, and he taxes all of his competitors basically out of business, and he hurts people who are using whiskey as currency, so he can set up a whiskey monopoly. So the Constitution really is unfit to exist. It's authorized the type of government we have today. They wanted to be able to create a central bank. That's why they drafted the Constitution. The Constitution was not created to protect freedom. A lot of people say, well, the Constitution restrains government and protects individual freedom. No, the opposite is true. It protects government and restrains individual freedoms. The closest thing we have to any wording concerning freedom is in the preamble, where it says, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves, meaning the 39 men who are signing, and our posterity. So, and if you go to the definition of liberty, and that's the word that they used a lot in the beginning of the country. They use the word liberty. And when I see the word liberty, sometimes I try and make an effort to replace it with freedom, because I'm more of a freedom person than liberty. Liberty infers license and permission. If you go to liberty and you look up the definition, it says the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, or political views. So it's talking about within a society that has authority. So basically, it's talking about permission. The state of not being imprisoned or enslaved. A right or privilege. Now, privilege, that's all about permission, people. The word privilege, that's permission. And then if you go down here, the power or scope to act as one pleases. However, one of the synonyms of liberty here is license. Now, if you go to the word license, it says a permit. Well, permission. From an authority to own or use something, to do a particular thing, or carry on a trade. A formal or official permission to do something. So I like using the word freedom. Freedom, the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. The absence of subjection to foreign domination or despotic government. The state of not being imprisoned or enslaved. The state of being physically unrestricted and able to move easily. The state of not being subject to or affected by a particular undesirable thing. The power of self-determination attributed to the will. The quality of being independent of fate or necessity. Unrestricted use of something. Unrestricted. You don't see the word license. You don't see the word permission or permit connected to the word freedom, but you do with liberty. And especially if you look in Oxford's dictionary, the original Oxford dictionary, you'll get a much clearer definition of liberty, to where it actually means license. It infers license. It infers permission. Freedom does not. Freedom is unrestrained. So the Constitution, when you talk about the Constitution, you cannot talk about the Constitution and freedom in the same breath. I don't see how people who love freedom can make reference to a Constitution. And who cares about an oath to a Constitution, an oath to a document which was created to give a central governing authority the power of taxation, the power to determine what is and what is not treason, and then to punish the person for committing an act of treason. There is no treason to a government. You can't commit treason to a fictional entity. So people need to quit using, talking about oaths to the Constitution. It's a legal document that exists to make you a slave. So, it talks about the consent of the governed to believe in the Declaration of Independence. Well, governed, that's the controlled. Consent of the controlled? How does that work? If you're controlled, you give your consent to be controlled? You're already controlled, so you're going to give more consent to be controlled even more? What the hell? So we're going to go to Washington's letter, and this is a letter that's part of the Constitution. Not many people even realize that it's part of the Constitution, but it is part of the Constitution, just as much a part of the Constitution as the Bill of Rights. It was a rider to the Constitution before the Bill of Rights came into existence. It was drafted at the same time of the Constitution. It's a letter by George Washington. It's a letter of transmittal that was going to go out with the Constitution. And remember, the Constitution is articles, sections, and clauses. Articles, sections, and clauses which establish a corporation. So what? You made an oath to a corporation. Big stinking deal. So this letter is part of the Constitution before the Bill of Rights. And this just shows that the Constitution was not about freedom. The Constitution was not even about liberty. The Constitution was about protecting the interest of a wealthy group of men. It was about protecting their interests, protecting their wealth. It had nothing to do with you. It had nothing to do with the common person back then. It had nothing to do with any other individual except those 39 men who signed it. Who cares about an oath to a constitution which created tax slaves? Who cares about a constitution which gave people the right to put down insurrection? Insurrection that, which was basically rebellion against a government that they thought at that time was tyrannical, because that government would not accept payment for taxes in the script that they issued to the people and wanted silver or gold. And when the people couldn't pay silver or gold, they went out and they confiscated the lands of those people that risked their lives to fight in that war that gave those 39 psychopaths power over that country. To hell with your Constitution. Screw your Constitution. And people who love freedom, quit making reference to this Constitution when you're talking about freedom. It's a document that enslaves. It's a legal document. And the Bill of Rights was added 2 years later through compromise with men such as George Mason, Patrick Henry, Samuel Adams, and Richard Henry Lee. And one of the only reasons that they even considered the Bill of Rights is because George Washington and Madison and Hamilton knew that Samuel Adams was ready to blow their ass up if they didn't make some kind of compromise, because he was a violent man. He was the first proto-anarchist. And he had some violent tendencies. But hey, none of us lived in his shoes. None of us, and we talk about, being peaceful. And we talk about the principle of non-aggression. Well, he felt that those men were being aggressive towards his freedom. So that's why he acted out violently. And if you haven't read Murray Rothbard's book, you need to read it. Because, and then, the book, the other book that I mentioned at the first, it escapes me right now. But anyway, let's go to that real quick. We'll just go back to the books. But Tyranny Unmasked by John Taylor. These books will actually show you that, what was going on at the beginning of the country. And, we talk about the non-aggression principle, but, these people were being aggressive. This government, these people who wanted to form government were being aggressive towards other people. So we really can't judge Samuel Adams. Yes, many of us in his shoes may have done the same thing. I mean, he was very brutal to the British, and he was about to become brutal to the men who were, and this is a fact, he was about to become very brutal to the men who were drafting the Constitution, because he himself was against it. And then you have the quote that's used many times, and it's a quote by Thomas Jefferson about the tree of liberty needing to be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Well, you know who the tyrant he was talking about was? It wasn't the king. They had already had independence from Great Britain. He was talking about George Washington. Look it up. People read these quotes and they quote these quotes and they don't even know the letter that they're quoting from. I mean, he was talking about George Washington, one of these people that people today think is a great patriot. Patriot my ass. Anyway, Washington's letter here shows that individual freedom was not even being considered at the time that the Constitution was being drafted. This is his letter. We now have the honor to submit to the consideration of the United States and Congress assembled that Constitution which has appeared to us the most advisable. The friends of our country have long seen and desired that the power of making war, peace, and treaties, that of levying money, aka taxation, theft, and regulating commerce, and the correspondent executive and judicial authority should be fully and effectually vested in the general government of the Union. But the impropriety of delegating such extensive trust to one body of men is evident. Hence, results the necessity of a different organization. There's your coup d'etat. That's a different organization from the Articles of Confederation, which they were operating under at the time. It is obviously impracticable that the federal government of these states to secure all rights of independent sovereignty to each, and yet provide for the interest and safety of all. And this is the part that should tell anyone that the Constitution is not a freedom document. Individuals entering into society must give up a share of liberty to preserve the rest. The magnitude of sacrifice must depend as well on situation and circumstance as on the object to be obtained. It is at all times difficult to draw with precision the line between those rights which must be surrendered and those which may be preserved. And on the present occasion, this difficulty was increased by a difference among the several states as to their situation, extent, habits, and particular interest. Obviously impracticable in the federal government of these states to secure all rights of independent sovereignty to each. So that means you're going to have to give up something. Why? For the interest and safety of all. Interest and safety of all? All who? You mean those 39 guys who were drafting it behind closed doors? Yeah, them. Individuals entering into society must give up a share of liberty to preserve the rest. Really? Now you got to give up liberty. You got to give up what we've already given you permission to do, to preserve safety. The magnitude of the sacrifice must depend as well on situation and circumstance as on the object to be obtained. It is at all times difficult to draw with precision the line between those rights which must be surrendered and those which may be preserved. Spoken like a true politician. In all our deliberations on this subject, we kept steadily in our view that which appears to us the greatest interest of every true American, the consolidation of our Union, central government, in which is involved our posterity, felicity, safety, perhaps our national existence. This important consideration, seriously and deeply impressed on our minds, led each state in the convention to be less rigid on points of inferior magnitude. And guess what one of those inferior magnitudes was? Weapons possessions, and we're going to get to that. Inferior magnitude than might have been otherwise expected, and thus the Constitution, which we now present, is the result of a spirit of enmity and that of mutual deference and concession. This letter, by right here, George Washington, it's part of the Constitution. It was sent out to the ratifying conventions. So, the political situation rendered indispensable the need for a central government to tax. That's what the Constitution was all about. It's about control. So how dare anyone talk about freedom and make reference to this document? Read the articles, sections, and clauses. It gives unlimited power. Patrick Henry talked about the unlimited power the Senate would have, that minority would be able to flip the rights of the majority, that the president could be a king, that the Constitution squinted toward monarchy. They tried to create through Shays' Rebellion. It was exactly what Brian over at High Impact Vlogs talks about. You got problem, reaction, solution. Shays' rebellion at that time was their problem. There was a reaction. The reaction was very small, though. I mean, Thomas Jefferson actually applauded Shays' rebellion. But there was a reaction among those who wanted to keep economic power in the colonies. There was a reaction by them, so the solution was the Constitution. Shays' rebellion was the problem. The reaction was, oh, we need a document so we can create a strong central government that has the power to tax, that has the power to suppress insurrection. And then the solution was the Constitution. Had nothing to do with freedom. Nothing at all to do with freedom. Freedom stands on its own. It doesn't need a piece of paper. It doesn't need a document. Freedom stands on its own. Freedom doesn't need permission of a piece of paper. Freedom is in here. It's in the heart of every man who loves freedom. And when Patrick Henry stated when anyone approached, as he put it, liberty, but I put it freedom, that you were to be suspicious of them. And that's what they were doing when they created the Constitution. They were approaching liberty and freedom, and he said to be on guard against that. Freedom doesn't need a document to protect it. Freedom doesn't need a government to protect it. Documents and governments, they go together. Freedom and document doesn't. Freedom's in here. Freedom stems from the heart of every man who loves it, who truly appreciates it and knows what it is. Every man that it's not some imaginary thing to, but every man who holds it dear. That's what freedom, that's where freedom comes from. Freedom comes from the Creator. It's bred within us. He gave us freedom of choice from the beginning. Freedom doesn't need a constitution. Freedom only needs men who love freedom, who enjoy freedom, who realize that no one has a higher claim to their life and property than they do. Freedom is enjoyed by men who will not commit a crime against another human being, who will do unto others as they would have those people do unto them, as the Messiah stated. Freedom doesn't need a document. And that really brings us to the amendments, but I'm already 48 minutes into this. So stay tuned for part 2, because part 2 is coming. And we're going to get into the amendment process. And we're going to show why the Second Amendment had nothing to do with the personal. Now, it's evolved into that, and people have fought to make it that. But original intent, the Second Amendment had nothing to do with carte blanche owning any weapon that you wanted to own. But I'm all for owning any weapon that you want to own, because I'm all for freedom. Because, true freedom, a man who loves true freedom will exercise responsibility. And he will not harm someone else just on a whim. He will not go around arbitrarily committing a crime. A man who truly loves freedom and enjoys freedom and understands freedom, he's responsible. He loves other people. He loves them enough to allow them to have their freedom. He doesn't need a damn piece of paper to prove that he has freedom. So anyway, we're going to get into the amendments, and I'm going to show that the Second Amendment isn't what people think it is today. And you can talk about your quotes all you want to. I had somebody talk about, they listed all these quotes. We don't even know if these quotes are actually even authentic. A lot of these quotes, there was that one quote with George Washington that the Second Amendment is the people's liberty's teeth. That was a bunch of BS. No quote ever existed. There is a quote that exists now, but it didn't come from George Washington. He never said that. So a lot of these quotes that people quote concerning the Second Amendment have been proven to be erroneous. So the Second Amendment, you go back to original intent, it has nothing to do with what people think it has to do with today. Back at the Virginia rally, when they said that there would be no weapons allowed on the state grounds at the Capitol, they had the right to do that according to the men who wrote the Constitution, according to the men who were in power back at the time of the inception of the Constitution. Because, as we're going to see, there was a lot of regulation of firearms back then. They even had to register their firearms back then. We don't have to register them now. Yeah, some people get permission, but, guess what? There's a black market, too. But anyway, a lot of people say, well, the Founding Fathers, they'd be rolling over in their grave. No, they wouldn't. They would agree with the men who are in charge today. They would give them their blessing. Anyway, so I'm 51 minutes into this, and we're going to have a part 2. I'm going to work on that in a little bit. But this is William Moore for Beyond the Ties That Bind. Remember, freedom doesn't need a document. All freedom needs is the heart of a man. Freedom stems from the heart of a man who loves freedom and loves his fellow human beings. That's all freedom needs, is a heart and a mind. Doesn't need a document. It doesn't need a paper to protect it. Never has. There have been free men before 1787, people. Lots of free men before 1787. This is William Moore for Beyond the Ties That Bind. And one of those ties that bind is your devotion to that piece of paper known as the Constitution. You need to break. You need to go beyond that tie that binds you to the Constitution, that tradition, that cultural bias. Until next time, peace.